Another warm, happy Sabbath to all of you. Start of a brand new year. That's always a little exciting and a little bit kind of heart-stopping and thinking, how long have we been here? How old am I now? The new year always starts with me thinking about how much time has gone by because I have a birthday not long after the new year. This week I turned 42. And some of you are laughing at me like, 42, what? And then the kids are like, 42, wow, that's old. But it always makes me think about how fast time flies and how it seems to speed up or slow down based on what you're doing. If you're a kid, maybe you can think back to this week. If you're an adult, maybe think back to when you were a kid and you had chores in your house. And your parents had you doing chores that you hated. Think of like your worst hated chore. How long did it take to do those chores? Felt like forever, right? You're like, oh, I hate doing that. This takes forever. Now contrast that with a vacation at the beach. You spend time at the beach and you blink and vacation's over. And you're like, oh, where did that time go? It just went by so fast. Isn't that funny how time seems to go by? Every new year, I'm always, I find myself thinking about how fast time goes by. We were recently last week at Aaron's grandparents' place in Pennsylvania, and they are 95 years old. And both live on their own in their home. He's got a garden still. They live out in the country there in Pennsylvania. And one thing that I love about going to their house is there's a lot of old stuff in their house. And the kids, all the grandkids were downstairs in the basement, and there were these two really old couches. And you could tell they were old just by looking at them and the style of these couches. These couches were from the 1950s. And I was explaining to my kids, I said to my kids, I said, do you realize how old these couches are? And they were kind of looking at me like, yeah, they're old, I get it. And I said, well, they were probably, well, maybe not Civil War veterans, but World War I veterans around when these were made. And for sure, kids of Civil War veterans were alive when these things were made and maybe even used. And there's not that much time between old history and today, just a couple of generations. And I was thinking about that this week. We are in 2022. What were things like just 100 years ago? What happened in 1922, just 100 years ago? Anybody know who the president was in 1922? What? Harding, correct. I'm impressed. Warren G. Harding was the president, and he introduced the first radio into the White House in 1922. And he gave his first speech on the radio there in the White House in 1922. 100 years ago, the Lincoln Memorial was dedicated. Anybody been to the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C.? Dedicated 100 years ago. Famous people that were born in 1922. You may have read about one yesterday. Betty White, who passed away yesterday, was born in 1922. Missed her 100th birthday by just a couple of weeks. Some other names that kids probably won't recognize. Carl Reiner, Doris Day, Judy Garland were born in 1922. Ava Gardner, George McGovern. If you wanted to buy a car, just as cars were coming in, you could buy an Oldsmobile for $1,375. A Packard, anybody know what a Packard is? I only know this because of my grandfather. He would name all the different cars going by. A Packard sold for $3,275. And if you wanted a fancy one, a Lincoln sedan was $4,700. A new house around this time was $6,300. Rent was about $15 a month. A movie ticket to go see a movie was 15 cents. This one hurts a little bit. Gasoline prices, 33 cents a gallon. A postage stamp was 2 pennies. 2 pennies. The job that you have today likely didn't exist in 1922. Think about what you do for a living. Maybe if you're a banker, or if you build homes, maybe, or if you're a farmer, maybe a doctor or a nurse. If you work in tech today, probably your job didn't exist. Things are so different from 1922 to today. We have space travel, computers, cell phones, nuclear power. Our personal travel is very, very quick. Airplanes. Everything is more expensive, as you can see. We have the internet now, too. Fashion has kind of gone downhill in the last 100 years. If you see what people wear today, you just shake your head and be like, what on earth are you wearing? I thought about this. If somebody who was an adult in 1922 time traveled and came to 2022 and had a conversation with you, how much of your conversation would they understand? Even if they're a native English speaker. How would you explain to somebody from 1922 what internet bandwidth is? How would you explain to them how a CD player works? And you might have to explain that to your kids. How would you explain virtual reality goggles? Bitcoin? How would you explain that to somebody from 1922? What a podcast is, or an emoji? An infomercial, a blog, malware, a computer virus. How would you explain that to somebody from 1922? Time goes by quickly. Things change very quickly over time as well. How do we spend the time that we have? We change how we spend our time. How many of you stayed up till midnight last night? Anybody? I say young hands. How many of you who are not raising your hand right now used to stay up until midnight? Anybody? Yeah, that's what I thought. See how things change over time? Not worth it anymore, is it? We change how we use our time as time goes by. In Psalm chapter 90, verse 12, it says, "So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom." In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 16, it says, "Making the best use of time, because the days are evil." It talks about making the best use of our time. And that made me think a little bit, what do I spend my time on? How do I use my time? We each have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How do I use my time that I have each week? And then another thought crossed my mind since I'm facing a birthday. How much time do you have? How much time do you have left? Isn't that a kind of a bizarre question to ask? Kind of a morose one, though, isn't it? But does it change how you use your time based on how much time you have left? It had me thinking this week. We're going to look at a story today in the Bible that compares how two different individuals used their time. And we'll see if we can learn something about our time here in 2022. Turn to your Bibles in Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. We're going to compare these two individuals, sisters, and how they made use of their time. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. And in verse 38 it says, "Now it happened as they went that he, Jesus, entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her home." Okay, let's stop for just a second. Who is this family? This is the family of Lazarus. Mary and Martha are the sisters. Lazarus is the brother. Jesus was very, very close to this family. This would be the first time that Jesus is coming to this area and spending time with this family. Maybe he already knew Lazarus, but Jesus was very, very close with their brother. He's passing through, and he comes to their home, and this home would, for Jesus' time in his ministry, this home would be kind of a refuge for Jesus. If you read the book called Desire of Ages on Jesus' life, we see that the author states that this was kind of an oasis for him where he could kind of let his hair down a little bit and he could talk, it says, without using parables. He could just straight up say what he wanted to say in this house. He was among very close friends in this house, and this is his first time in here. Martha welcomes him into her home, and verse 39 says, "And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word." So picture in your mind, here's what the home looks like. Jesus and his entourage of followers come into the home. Martha is very excited, invites them in. She is kind of the hostess. Now, For those of you that have hosted people in your home, it's kind of a big responsibility, right? You want people to leave your home wanting to come back again. When people talk about coming to your house, you want them to say nice things. Not, man, I went to their house and it was really kind of boring. The food was horrible, it was late, I was starved. You don't want people to say stuff like that, right? You want to make a good impression, and this is Martha. Jesus comes in, and in the home, Jesus starts sharing a little bit. He starts teaching and talking and inspiring the people there. Mary sits down at Jesus' feet. She's not interested in hosting at all. She sits down and listens to Jesus and is having her soul fed. Martha, in the meantime, is doing double the work because Mary's not in there helping her. Now, for those of you that, maybe you identify more with Mary or Martha, but I think we can all look at Martha and be like, all right, I get a little bit of that, of frustration maybe. Mary is in listening to Jesus talk and hearing his word. Verse 40 says, but Martha was distracted with much serving. Now, I looked at this part and I thought, boy, I can relate a little bit with Martha. There's a lot of stuff in life that distracts me from things that are important. There are always things on my plate. There is always something else to do, something else to take care of, an email to respond to, paperwork to fill out. There is always something else going on. And as I read that line about Martha where she was busy, she had all this stuff going on and she was distracted, I thought to myself, boy, there are so many things for us to be distracted with in 2021 and 2022. There is always something to take up our time, isn't there? It's so easy to be distracted, even with good things. I mean, look at Martha. She has the privilege of hosting Jesus in her home. That's a good thing, isn't it? But sometimes we can even be taking up too much time by doing good things, and you're like, well, how is that possible? How is it possible to have good things taking up our time and that be a negative thing? I think we see a little bit of this explanation in the story. Because here is what Martha is missing out on. Martha is missing out on that key connecting time with Jesus. Sure, he's in the house. But there's no connection there. She's in another room. Mary is right there at the feet of Jesus, having her soul fed. Martha doesn't like this at all. She doesn't like how Mary is spending her time. She thinks that she should be in helping her. And so Martha comes in and addresses Jesus, and it's kind of a little bit testy. It's a little bit accusatory in how she approaches Jesus. She says, Lord, do you not care? Okay, hold on, time out right there. That's kind of a gutsy thing to say to Jesus, isn't it? Don't you care? What's the obvious answer? Of course he cares about her. It's a little bit of verbal manipulation to get him to do what she wants him to do. Don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to get up and help me. She's not spending the time helping me like I think she should spend her time. Kind of saying that Mary's wasting her time sitting there listening to Jesus. Tell her to help me out. And Jesus answers in verse 41 and says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things. Again, as I was reading through this week, I thought to myself, man, those words could have been spoken right to me. Jamey, you are worried and troubled about many things. Could those words be said about you in 2021, facing 2022? You are worried and troubled about many different things. There's a lot to be worried about, isn't there? There's a lot to be troubled about. There are so many things going on in this world that we could worry about and could bother us. What good does it do to worry about stuff? I heard someone say once that worry is a form of atheism. And I stopped and thought about that for a long time. Worry, a form of atheism. Is that true? Can worry be a form of atheism? Not believing that God can take care of us. Jesus says to Martha, "You are worried and troubled about many things." But he continues on, and he says, "But one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her." In a life that is filled with worry and stress and doubt and fear, Jesus says the one thing that we need more than anything else is to spend time in his presence. And when we do that, there won't be any more worry and fretting, because we will have faith in the one with whom we have been spending our time with. The one thing that is needed, Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her. They had a difference in how they wanted to spend their time. Both good things, but Jesus really highlights Mary and the importance of spending quality time with him. In the book on Jesus' life, Desire of Ages, on page 525, it says, "The one thing that Martha needed was a calm, devotional spirit, a deeper anxiety for knowledge concerning the future immortal life, and the graces necessary for spiritual advancement. She needed less anxiety for the things which pass away and more for those things which endure forever. There is a wide field for the Marthas with their zeal in active religious work, but let them first sit with Mary at the feet of Jesus. Let diligence, promptness, and energy be sanctified in the grace of Christ. Then the life will be an unconquerable power for good." That last part is really pretty cool. When we have a solid devotional life with Jesus, it says that our lives will be an unconquerable power for good. Today, we are fortunate to be able to enjoy 24 hours of time. And tomorrow, if we're lucky, we will be able to do the same thing. Nothing is guaranteed. But when you wake up tomorrow, how will you spend the time that you are given on January 2, 2022? How will you spend your time between now and when Jesus comes? We are 1 year closer to Jesus coming. That's one thing we can be excited about in a New Year's. Today is 1 year closer to when Jesus comes. How will we spend our time between now and then? Are there things we should be focusing our time on in the amount of time we have left? For sure, there is a call in our lives in regards to evangelism and telling people about Jesus. But what about our personal time? There's an individual in the Bible who is a very unique individual, and I like studying how he spent his time. There is a compilation book that is one of my favorites. I'm going through it again right now. It's called Living the Life of Enoch. And it's a compilation book of everything from the writings of Ellen White that she wrote about Enoch. And very, very inspiring little book. It's not that big. There's only maybe 93 pages in this book. But it is an awesome, awesome little book, Living the Life of Enoch. And I've read up on him. There's not a ton in the Bible about Enoch. He's one of two people that are described as walking with God. Anybody know the other person? Noah. Noah was the other person that the Bible describes as walking with God. Noah and Enoch. And that's a very strong statement to say someone walked with God. Wouldn't that be an awesome thing to be said about us? The life of Enoch is fascinating. He was so close to God, and his mind was already on heavenly things so much that God just said, you know what? I might as well just bring him up to heaven with me right now. The Bible says he disappeared and he was no longer here. Wouldn't that be an awesome experience? Your heart is so closely knit to heaven that God's just like, just come on up already. You're already ready here. Much of his life was spent in solitude and reflection and prayer. Let me read this. It's from the Story of Redemption, page 57. It says, Enoch chose to be separate from the wicked people of his time, and he spent much of his time in solitude, which he devoted to reflection and prayer. He waited before God and prayed to know his will more perfectly, that he might perform it. There's two pieces in this quote about Enoch that stood out to me. One is that he spent time in solitude. That is really hard to do in a busy life facing 2022, isn't it? Life is so busy that it's really kind of hard to find time for solitude, just you and God. And in that solitude, he devoted it to reflection and prayer. Two things that are hard to do when you're super busy and things are going 100 miles an hour. And as I was reading this, I thought to myself, there is a challenge for me in 2022. I want to spend more time like Enoch did. I would love for my life to be less busy. We'll see how that goes. But I would love to spend more time in solitude with God, just me and God. In the book Christ Object Lessons, page 129 and 130, it says, and I love this quote. I love this quote so much. It says, if we keep the Lord ever before us, allowing our hearts to go out in thanksgiving and praise to him, we shall have a continual freshness in our religious life. I love the word continual freshness. I often think, I grew up in San Diego, we had fruit all over the place, fresh fruit, right? We had about every kind of tree you can imagine in my front yard. And we would have, one of my favorite things were fresh tangerines. We have a tangerine, my parents still live in the same house, and there's a tangerine tree where the skin grows off of the tangerine meat about a quarter of an inch like this. And you can peel that tangerine in about 3 seconds. It's so easy. You don't have to dig your thumbnail in and then try and peel it. It just peels just so quick. And I love getting the fresh tangerines. Now, also, we had white grapefruit trees. Now, if you like grapefruit, probably you like the pink grapefruit. The white grapefruit has quite a kick on it. It's very, very sour, and not a lot of people like the white grapefruit. So, on our trees, some of these white grapefruit would be unpicked. And they would be past their prime, and they would start to rot on the tree. And they would kind of go brown a little bit, and they would be really pretty soft. You didn't want to touch them. And they started to go bad, right? And the difference between a fresh piece of fruit and a rotten piece of fruit is very distinguishable. Sometimes in our lives, our devotional lives can feel kind of like rotten fruit, like we haven't kept up with it, or we haven't been there in a long time. And it feels a little stale in our devotional life. In this quote, I love this. It says, when we regularly stay connected to Jesus, when we keep him before us and we make our devotional time a priority, the words that the author used is we will have a continual freshness. In your devotional fruit basket, there will always be fresh fruit. None of it will be old and rotting. When you look at your fruit basket, you're going to be like, yeah, today I'm going to get some more fresh fruit. It's going to be fresh. It's not going to be old and rotten. You will be inspired when you spend that regular time with Jesus. She continues, our prayers will take the form of a conversation with God as we would talk to a friend. He will speak his mysteries to us personally. Often there will come to us a sweet, joyful sense of the presence of Jesus. Often our hearts will burn within us as he draws nigh to commune with us as he did with Enoch. When this is in truth the experience of the Christian, there is seen in his life a simplicity, a humility, meekness, and lowliness of heart, that show all with whom he associates that he has been with Jesus and learned of him. So as we begin 2022, we have a certain amount of time that is allotted to us. There's all kinds of different things jockeying for position for our attention. How will you spend your time in 2022? What will be the priorities that take up your time? I want to challenge you to spend your time this year doing something meaningful that grows your relationship with Jesus. I have an older brother, his name is Danny. And Danny is almost 4 years older than me, which means he was born in 1976. The last World War II soldier to surrendered in 1974, just 2 years before my brother was born. And you might be thinking to yourself, wait, did you say World War II veteran? Yes, and he was still actively fighting the war. Now, if you're a historian at all, you will know that World War II ended in what year? 1945. Very distinct ending to the war. Well, the Japanese Empire had soldiers spread all throughout Southeast Asia, the South Pacific, tons and tons of islands in the South Pacific. I lived on an island that was occupied by the Japanese, and there were all kinds of old relics and World War II pieces still laying around. And this gentleman, his name was Hiro Onada. This is one of the wildest stories I've ever heard, and one of the most sad stories I've ever heard. You may have heard this before as well. Mind-blowing story. He was given orders during the war that he was not ever to surrender, that he was to fight to the death or commit suicide. Those were his only options given by his commanding officer. Well, he was serving in the Imperial Army. He was stationed out in the Philippines. And as the war ended, nobody happened to give him the memo. And so he kept on fighting the war. He lived out in the jungle, still had his rifle, still had his uniform, and he would conduct guerrilla warfare against the Filipinos, to which they must have been thinking, who is this guy? War's been over. As the years go by, who's shooting at us? They tried to tell him the war was over. Must be a trick. I'm not believing it. And he disappeared back out into the jungle. Year after year after year went by, and this man was fighting a war that wasn't even going on. He was living in the jungle, eating grubs, living in a cave, until 1974. Think of all the years that he spent out there. When they finally got his commanding officer in Japan, who was long retired, they flew him to the Philippines, and he said, I will only surrender to my commanding officer. They found him, brought him in, and he's like, okay, I believe you now. And he finally surrendered. The guy's gun still worked, by the way. It still fired, which is pretty impressive. After living in a tropical jungle for, 29 years, something like that. His rifle still worked. His uniform was kind of tattered up, which you can imagine. But this guy had been fighting a war that didn't exist anymore for so long. And I thought about this guy, and I thought, this guy wasted around a quarter of a century of his life for something that was meaningless. When he got back, everybody must have asked him, so why'd you do it? You just wasted all these decades. Just living out in the jungle. What was the purpose of that? Why did you spend all that time wasting your life away? Why didn't you believe anybody? I thought, what a sad story. What time wasted out in the middle of the jungle doing something that was completely meaningless. Why do we spend time doing what we do? With the time you have on this earth, I want to challenge you to spend it doing something meaningful. spending your time contemplating things that matter and delineating between those and things that don't matter. You see, Martha was so infatuated on and dealing with things that really didn't have much of an eternal consequence. Mary was focused on things that had an eternal consequence, things that were changing, the words that were changing her heart and inspiring her. And that's where she focused her time. Now, in order for us to do this and to follow in the footsteps of Mary and Enoch, in a busy, busy world that is 2021 going into 2022 now, probably our biggest challenge is carving out time. That seems to be the number one enemy is things taking up our time that leave very little time for us and God. So my challenge to you, and it's a challenge to me as well, is to look at your life and starting 2022 and figure a way out to change your priorities and how you spend your time each day. And to carve out, in the best part of your day, your time with God. Now, there's a lot of theories on this. People say if you do your devotions, it's got to be in the morning. Not if you're a night owl. If nighttime is your time and you have that quiet time, pick out the best part for you to spend your time with Jesus. Figure a way out to reduce the busyness in your life. I had a friend kind of throw out a challenge. He's taking his phone and replacing it with a flip phone. And right off the bat, I was like, ooh. How's he gonna make it? My whole life revolves around this thing. My calendar, if it's not on my calendar, it's not happening. I have all my to-do list, all this stuff that's right here on my phone, and this honestly takes up a lot of my time. And his challenge to go to a flip phone, I was like, what would my life be like if I had a flip phone instead of a smartphone? And my first thought was, I bet I'd have more time on my hands. And then my thought process kept on going. I thought I'd probably have more time for reading and probably more time for devotions and things. And so I haven't fully committed to it yet because I'm a little nervous. But I'm probably going to end up at the Verizon store looking see if they have like an old school flip phone, which actually, I don't know if you remember the flip phones. When you closed it, there was such a nice closure at the end of a phone call. You're like, all right, see you later. Click. Boom, put it in your pocket. It was just a nice finish to a phone call. I kind of miss that. But I thought to myself, I wonder if I would have more time if I did that. I wonder if I would have more time to spend with God without that extra busyness. So it's a challenge I'm looking at. How is it you can change some things in 2022 to prioritize your time with Jesus so that at the end of 2022, next year when we're either here or in heaven, having church, you can look back and be like, man, 2022 was my best year spiritually. 2022 was the year I had the most faith in God. 2022 was the year I gave what was on my back to Jesus to carry. What if you looked back and 2022 was your best year with Jesus? My challenge to you as we look forward to this new year, figure a way out to make your devotional time with Jesus count so that you have that same freshness in your walk with Jesus that Enoch had. And so it can be said of you that you walk with Jesus. And when you do that, your worries about things that may or may not happen in 2022 will be gone because you will have given those things over to Jesus. And you'll be walking in stride with him each and every day. And those worries will start to dissipate because your trust is now more in Jesus. We're going to sing a closing song. As we wrap up, I want to invite our worship team to come up. And our closing song is called "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." And when we put our trust and our faith in Him, the things that usually daily stress us out and make us more worried seem to dissipate because Jesus helps us handle those things. So as we sing this song, may this be a prayer in your heart to trust Jesus more and to connect with Him more in 2022. Let's stand together and sing "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus."